The jungle didn't care who you were. It swallowed nations, patrols, and reputations. But deep inside that green maze, two elite forces faced the same enemy under very different rules. The Navy SEALs came in fast, short missions, sudden strikes, noise if needed. They were hunters built for speed. The Australian SAS moved like ghosts, slow, patient, silent for days. They didn't chase the enemy, they watched them, counted them, understood them, and then disappeared. On paper, both units were elite. In the jungle, their missions were worlds apart. And that's the part no one tells you. Not every Special Forces unit can do what another does. Not because of skill, but because of doctrine, command structure, and the simple fact that the jungle punishes the wrong kind of tactics. Imagine standing in that darkness, humid air sticking to your skin, knowing one mistake means an entire regiment might turn toward you. Some units lived in that pressure. Others were never meant to. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. The Vietnam War had many fronts, many units, and many ways of fighting. But few comparisons are as misunderstood as the one between the U.S. Navy SEALs and the Australian SAS. On paper, both belonged to the elite tier of Special Operations Forces. Both trained hard. Both faced danger. Both earned reputations for skill and courage. But in Vietnam, the two units lived in different worlds, shaped by different missions, environments, and expectations. The differences weren't about talent or bravery. They were about purpose. To understand why Navy SEALs couldn't operate like the Australian SAS, you first need to understand what each unit was sent to do. Their jobs were not interchangeable. Their commanders didn't want them to behave the same way. Their missions didn't ask for the same skills, and the jungle punished anyone who tried to force the wrong tactic in the wrong place. The Navy SEALs were built for impact, fast missions, direct action, quick strikes. Their main hunting grounds were the rivers, canals, and mangrove swamps of the Mekong Delta. Many of their operations involved boarding boats, hitting Viet Cong safe houses, or raiding coastal villages suspected of supplying enemy forces. They moved in the dark, fast and hard, with sudden bursts of gunfire that shocked the enemy. They relied on speed, surprise, and aggressive movement. They were trained to go in, hit the target, and get out before nearby enemy units could react. A typical SEAL mission might last a few hours, sometimes at night, rarely more than a day. Their gear reflected this reality. They carried heavy firepower but fewer long-term supplies. Extra magazines took priority over extra rations. Their radios were built for short communications and rapid extraction. They used small boats, helicopter drops, or infiltration by water. They entered as a punch, not a whisper. The Australian SAS, meanwhile, were built for a different kind of war. Their job was not to strike first. Their job was to disappear into the jungle, watch the enemy, and stay hidden long enough to understand what was really happening behind enemy lines. They were the eyes of the 1st Australian Task Force. They lived on information, enemy unit sizes, movement patterns, base locations, supply routes, and upcoming operations. The intel they brought back shaped how entire battalions deployed. They didn't attack unless they had no choice. Their weapon was silence. An SAS patrol often lasted 5 to 10 days, sometimes longer. The men carried enough supplies to survive on their own, miles from friendly bases. Their packs were heavy but carefully organized. Every item had a purpose. Every sound mattered. They walked with spacing of 10–15 meters between each man, moving at a pace sometimes slower than one step every few seconds. They stopped often, listened, and looked for signs, bent branches, footprints, cooking smoke far in the trees. Every detail mattered. Where SEALs expected contact, SAS patrols avoided it. A single gunshot could expose them. A few loud footsteps could alert a nearby regiment. They operated deep in enemy territory, where thousands of Viet Cong or North Vietnamese army troops marched, ate, and slept. To be detected meant disaster. And because they avoided contact, their mindset had to remain calm, patient, and controlled. They were not in a rush. They were in a contest of endurance. Imagine being on patrol with them. The air is wet, thick with the smell of rotting leaves. Your clothes cling to your skin. You hear insects crawling, water dripping from vines, distant movement you can't identify. You place each foot slowly, rolling it carefully to avoid snapping a twig. You breathe gently so your chest doesn't brush too hard against your pack straps. You don't talk, you don't cough, you barely swallow. The silence is your protection. In this world, loud aggression, the kind the SEALs were designed for, was suicide. It wasn't better or worse. It was simply wrong for the environment. The differences in patrol size also shaped how each force operated. A SEAL team often moved in squads of 6 to 12 men, enough firepower to fight their way out, enough manpower to dominate a target building quickly. The SAS preferred 4-man or 6-man patrols, small, invisible. A group too large made too much noise and left too big a signature in the jungle. Then there was the issue of command expectations. U.S. commanders wanted SEALs to disrupt enemy activity in populated and coastal areas. They aimed to break the Viet Cong's support networks by hitting them where they lived and moved among civilians. SEALs were perfect for that. Fast, flexible, and aggressive. Australian commanders wanted a different result from their SAS. They wanted early warning. They wanted knowledge. They wanted to stop enemy battalions before they reached Australian infantry units. The SAS delivered that by mapping out enemy movement, observing camps, counting soldiers, and calling in artillery strikes only when needed. The intelligence they gathered often saved hundreds of lives, but the work demanded patience, discipline, and near invisibility. The overlap between the two forces existed, but only at the edges. Both were skilled at small unit tactics. Both trained to operate behind enemy lines. Both relied on stealth when needed. But the type of stealth mattered. A SEAL could sneak up on a hut and breach it quietly. An SAS patrol could walk 3 meters behind a moving Viet Cong column and never be detected. Different kinds of silence, different levels of risk, different goals. Even their mental preparation reflected this. SEALs trained to seize control of chaotic environments, to dominate a fight with speed and aggression. SAS soldiers trained to avoid chaos entirely. They accepted long stretches of slow tension, knowing the danger was constant and close. Their hearts stayed steady because panic revealed you. Their bodies moved at a pace that most soldiers found unnatural. As you read this, you might think one style was harder than the other. But that's the wrong way to look at it. The truth is simple. Each force mastered what it needed to master. Each unit fought the war it was given. And their missions were so different that expecting one to behave like the other would have been a mistake, one paid for in blood. By the end of this chapter, one fact becomes clear. The Navy SEALs could not operate like the Australian SAS in Vietnam because they were not supposed to. Their missions were built differently from the ground up. Their environments demanded different skills. Their commanders needed different results. This chapter sets the foundation. Next, we go into the jungle itself, the environment that forced these differences to exist. Vietnam didn't just shape tactics. It dictated them. Every step, every breath, every movement a soldier made was influenced by the environment around him. And when you compare the places where Navy SEALs operated to the places where the Australian SAS lived for days on end, it becomes clear why their methods could never match. The Mekong Delta, the SEALs' primary zone, was a maze of twisting rivers, mudded banks, and thick mangrove roots. There were villages on stilts, floating markets, and narrow canals that acted like hidden highways for Viet Cong movement. The water carried sound in strange ways. Gunfire could echo off tall nipa palms. Engines could be heard miles away. Boats were everywhere: fishing boats, sampans, cargo barges, and patrol craft. It was a loud environment, restless and constantly shifting. Because of this, Navy SEALs used speed. They slipped in on Boston whalers or PBR boats, crouched low as engines roared and water thrashed around them. They were expected to close distance fast and strike hard. Their targets often knew Americans were in the area within minutes, sometimes seconds. Surprise didn't come from silence, it came from timing. The Australian SAS worked someplace completely different. Phuoc Thai province was a jungle fortress. A deep, tangled world of towering trees, vine-choked gullies, bamboo thickets, and steep ridges. The air was heavy with humidity that made uniforms cling to skin like wet sheets. Every surface was slick. Every leaf dripped. Even at night, the temperature hardly dropped. Moving through this environment was slow, exhausting, and unforgiving. Visibility was a few meters at best. Sound traveled oddly, sometimes absorbed by thick vegetation, sometimes amplified by a single snap of bamboo. In this world, silence didn't just matter. It was life or death. This is why the SAS developed a unique form of movement. One step, pause, listen. Another step, pause again. The patrol leader determined the rhythm based on terrain. A noisy area meant even slower movement. A dense patch of bamboo might require crawling. They were not just trying to stay quiet. They were trying to stay invisible to an enemy who often moved in groups of 50 to 200 men. SEALs didn't deal with that scale of danger on most missions. They hit targets and left before large enemy formations arrived. Their escape routes were planned to the minute. Their boats, helicopters, or extraction teams were waiting for them. SAS patrols, on the other hand, were alone. Nothing waited for them. No fast boats. No escorting helicopters hovering nearby. If they were discovered, help could be hours away, if help could even reach them at all. Deep in enemy territory, surrounded by thick jungle, radio signals bounced strangely. Weather shifted fast. Evacuation required luck, planning, and careful timing. This physical isolation shaped everything about how they moved. Consider the simple act of crossing a creek. A SEAL team, moving fast on a direct action raid, might splash through, weapons ready, accepting the noise because timing mattered more than stealth. They could afford a few seconds of noise because their mission was already loud. An SAS patrol approached the water like it was a tripwire. They checked both banks for footprints. They examined vegetation for cuts made by machetes. They stepped only where rocks or solid mud could hide their impressions. They moved slowly, carefully, ensuring no sound echoed off the water or snapped in the brush. A single misplaced step could reveal their presence to enemy trackers. The jungle rewarded patience. The delta rewarded decisive action. These weren't choices. They were survival strategies built by geography. Now think about equipment. A SEAL carried what helped him dominate a short fight: grenades, ammo, extra magazines, demolition tools, and radios optimized for quick communication. Heavy firepower made sense because firefights were expected. They might enter a hut, take contact from 10 meters away, and need to respond instantly. An Australian SAS soldier packed much differently. Food tablets, rice, dried ration packs, extra socks, water-purifying tablets, lightweight camouflage nets, silent straps, tape to secure anything that could rattle, long-sleeve shirts to keep insects off skin, and most importantly, gear that could remain quiet even after days of sweat, rain, mud, and rough movement. Weight was a constant enemy. The jungle punished anything heavy. The heat punished anything unnecessary. And the mosquitoes punished everything living. Yet SAS patrols carried enough to last a week without resupply. That meant carefully balancing survival, stealth, and endurance. 2 magazines extra might save them once, but a week of food kept them alive every day of the mission. Firepower took second place to sustainability. Meanwhile, a SEAL mission rarely required long-term endurance. Their loadouts favored firefight superiority, not multi-day survival. Their doctrine never demanded that they stay hidden for 6 days within a kilometer of a battalion-size enemy unit. You cannot expect 2 units with such different gear, movement styles, and mission lengths to operate the same way. Then there was the jungle's effect on sound. In Phuoc Tai, the SAS learned to recognize natural sound patterns. The chirp of insects, the hum of cicadas, the rustle of branches. They memorized these rhythms. If a nearby sound broke the pattern, footsteps, coughing, weapons clicking, they knew an enemy force was close, sometimes dangerously close. SEALs used sound differently. They used it to mask fast approaches. They controlled timing, not quiet. Their noise didn't always matter because their exit plan didn't depend on long-term stealth. But SAS patrols depended on the jungle's silence like it was a shield. A single metallic click could expose their position for days. Even rest was different. A SEAL team rested after extraction, once the mission was complete. They could relax, debrief, reorganize, and prepare for the next target. An SAS patrol rested inside the jungle itself. They slept in short shifts, always half listening for movement. They didn't pitch tents or hammocks. They slept on the ground, often muddy, always alert. They didn't cook hot meals because smoke or smell could attract patrols. Everything was designed for invisibility. Imagine trying to sleep when you know an enemy platoon is somewhere nearby, maybe one ridge over, maybe 100 meters away. Imagine controlling your breathing so it doesn't wake the man next to you. Imagine knowing that at any moment, you may need to stand up silently and disappear into the bush without leaving a trace. This environment didn't just shape tactics, it shaped the men. It taught them to be patient, calm, and alert even when their legs ached and their packs felt like anchors. It taught them that sound was as dangerous as gunfire. It taught them that the jungle was not just a stage. It was an enemy watching every move. The SEALs world taught different lessons. Move fast, strike hard, use aggression as a weapon. Overwhelm the enemy before they understand what happened. Both lessons were valid, both were effective. Both were born directly from the ground the men walked on. And that's why Navy SEALs could not operate like the Australian SAS. Not because they lacked the skill, but because their environment shaped the very tactics they lived by. If you want to understand why Navy SEALs couldn't operate like the Australian SAS in Vietnam, you must understand the art that defined SAS patrols, the science of silence, not simple quiet, not careful walking, but a discipline so deep and practiced that it became instinctive, a way of moving, breathing, and thinking that allowed a handful of men to glide through enemy territory without leaving a trace. To American advisors who saw it for the first time, it felt almost unnatural. The SAS patrol moved like a shadow, 6 men at most, sometimes only 4. The spacing between them was strict, 10 to 15 meters, sometimes more if visibility allowed. This spacing wasn't random. It protected the patrol. If one man was hit, the others were far enough away to avoid immediate detection. If a claymore mine detonated or an ambush triggered, the entire team wouldn't be wiped out in a single blast. Spacing saved lives long before the enemy even realized anyone was present. SEAL teams used spacing too, but for different purposes and at different distances. They expected contact. They moved with the assumption that when bullets flew, they would return fire aggressively. Tight formations allowed faster communication and concentrated firepower. The SAS expected no contact. They avoided it like a deadly trap. Their spacing was built for invisibility, not for fighting their way out. Every man in an SAS patrol had a role: scout, patrol commander, signaller, tail-end Charlie, the silent guardian who kept watch behind. No one stepped where the man in front of him had stepped. This prevented a single noisy patch of ground from giving away the entire patrol. It also reduced the trail they left behind, tracks that enemy trackers could use to follow them. SEALs didn't worry about leaving long-term tracks. By the time anyone found them, they were already gone. Their war was measured in minutes. The SAS war was measured in days. Now imagine the jungle around them. Hot air pressing against their skin, branches brushing their sleeves, mosquitoes whining around their ears, the smell of damp soil rising with every step. Inside that environment, an SAS soldier didn't simply walk. He listened to everything. He listened to insects. He listened to the rhythm of the forest. If those rhythms suddenly stopped or changed, he froze. That was often the only warning that an enemy patrol was close. A SEAL team didn't rely on this type of deep environmental reading. Their missions were fast and loud. Their ears were tuned for sudden gunfire, for shouted commands, for engines and rotor blades. Both types of listening mattered, but only one kept a six-man patrol alive in the middle of an NVA battalion's hunting grounds. Noise discipline in the SAS wasn't just a rule, it was a lifestyle. Rifles were taped to stop metal-on-metal clicks. Dog tags were wrapped in rubber. Magazines were secured tightly so they wouldn't rattle. Canteens were padded to eliminate sloshing sounds. Even zipper pulls were removed or tied off. SEALs took noise discipline seriously, but not to this extreme. Their missions didn't demand silence for 5 straight days. Their actions, breaking down doors, setting charges, firing suppressed weapons, were already noisy events. SAS noise discipline was about never being detected, not once, not at any moment. Their boots touched ground like soft hands. Their packs were adjusted so nothing shifted. When they stopped, they froze completely, becoming part of the jungle itself. A patrol might stay motionless for hours if they sensed movement nearby. SEALs couldn't function like this even if they tried. Their tasks didn't allow that level of immobility. They had to reach targets, assault them, and extract. Waiting still for 4 hours was not part of raid doctrine. And then there was the issue of communication. SEALs used hand signals, but they also whispered when needed. SAS soldiers almost never spoke once inside their patrol area. Hand signals were precise and well practiced. Everything had a meaning: a raised fist, a pointed finger, a flat hand slicing the air. This wasn't just training, it was survival. The human voice carried through the jungle like a torch in darkness. One wrong word could bring an entire company of enemy troops toward them. Now picture an SAS patrol approaching a game trail. The leader moves forward first, his rifle angled down toward the ground, scanning for wires, tracks, or disturbed soil. He crouches, studies the trail for a full minute, maybe more. He reads the footprints, age, direction, weight. He looks for bent leaves, for mud still wet from a sandal. If the trail is fresh, the patrol changes direction. They melt away into the bush, leaving nothing behind. A SEAL team encountering a trail might move quickly across it, maintaining pace. Their goal wasn't to study the long-term movements of enemy regiments. Their goal was to reach a target on time. Both methods were correct for their missions. The deeper difference was mental. SAS soldiers lived with the knowledge that at any moment, without warning, they could walk directly into a force 100 times their size. They carried responsibilities very few soldiers ever experienced. Their calmness wasn't natural. It was trained, refined, and reinforced by the unbroken silence of the jungle. They were patient when hungry, calm when soaked by rain, focused when their legs trembled from exhaustion, unmoving even when sweat stung their eyes. Their endurance wasn't physical alone, it was psychological. SEALs had remarkable psychological strength too, but theirs came from embracing chaos, charging into gunfire, clearing rooms, rescuing prisoners, or engaging forces at close range. Aggression was their weapon. Momentum was their protection. Try using aggression in the middle of a jungle ridge, 2 kilometers inside enemy territory, with no support. It wouldn't work. And the SAS never attempted it. This is why enemy forces feared SAS patrols differently than they feared SEAL raids. SEALs hit you fast and violently. The SAS watched you for days, and you never knew they were there until artillery fell on your position. 2 kinds of fear, 2 kinds of impact, 2 completely different skill sets. And this silence, the discipline, the spacing, the invisible movement, created a reality no SEAL operator could replicate in Vietnam, no matter how skilled he was. Not because SEALs lacked ability, but because the entire context of their operations demanded a different way of thinking. The jungle chose who could operate inside it, and the SAS were shaped to fit that world perfectly. To understand why Navy SEALs couldn't operate like the Australian SAS in Vietnam, you must look at what each unit was built to do. Missions shape men as much as terrain does. And in Vietnam, the missions of SEALs and SAS patrols were not just different, they were opposite ends of the spectrum. The Navy SEALs were built for direct action, short missions, violent contact, rapid insertion, rapid extraction. Hit a target and leave before the enemy regrouped. The Australian SAS were built for deep reconnaissance, long missions, avoiding contact, watching the enemy quietly, calling in air or artillery at the perfect moment. These two mission types may look similar on paper, small teams operating in hostile territory, but in reality, they were completely different forms of warfare. A typical SEAL mission might last 40 minutes to 4 hours. An SAS patrol could last 4 days to 2 weeks. Now imagine what this difference does to planning. SEALs plan to overwhelm the enemy. SAS plan to never be seen by the enemy at all. SEALs rehearsed fast-paced assaults, timing every second. SAS rehearsed silence and patience, controlling every breath. SEALs used helicopters, fast boats, supporting fire and surprise speed. SAS patrols used only their legs, their maps, their radios, and the trust in the men beside them. The missions defined the mindset. Picture a SEAL team preparing for a raid on a Viet Cong-held stilt house. Weapons loaded, faces painted, explosive charges prepped, extraction boat engines warming up in the dark. They know once the first door is kicked in, the fight will be loud and violent. They will dominate through shock and aggression. Their greatest advantage is momentum, the ability to strike with force before the enemy understands what is happening. Now picture an SAS patrol beginning a long insertion. No boats, no helicopters dropping them directly on target. Just a small clearing or a narrow track or a point deep in the jungle where they begin walking. Their packs are heavy. Their clothes are soaked with sweat within minutes. They pace themselves, checking bearings, listening for movement, avoiding any sign of human presence. The goal is not to engage. The goal is to disappear. One mission type thrives on speed. The other survives on slowness. Now think about intelligence gathering. SEALs often gathered intelligence from captured documents or prisoners during raids. They hit a target believed to hold enemy information, then extracted quickly with whatever they found. The SAS gathered intelligence through observation, sometimes staring at an enemy trail for 6 hours straight, counting footsteps, supply trains, platoon strengths, and movement patterns. They sketched maps. They drew diagrams. They memorized radio antenna shapes and bunker layouts. They listened for accents or dialects to identify units. A SEAL might uncover information by force. An SAS soldier uncovered information by patience. And then there was the question of extraction. A SEAL raid was designed around extraction. Everything after the first shot revolved around getting out safely. An SAS patrol didn't have that luxury. If they were compromised 5 kilometers from friendly lines, they couldn't expect a helicopter to drop out of the sky and rescue them instantly. They might have to break contact. They might have to hide. They might have to move all night to escape a sweeping enemy unit. This shaped their behavior. It especially shaped how they reacted to contact. A SEAL team in a firefight hit back hard. Automatic fire, shotguns, grenades, close-range combat. Their doctrine encouraged aggression because their missions relied on destroying the threat quickly. An SAS patrol hit by enemy fire had one primary goal: break contact and vanish. They used controlled bursts, smoke, and terrain to escape. They did not chase the enemy. They did not pursue. They did not press an attack. Their job was not to fight. Their job was to report. This difference may seem simple, but in the jungle it meant everything. Now imagine an SAS patrol tracking an enemy regiment. For 3 days they observe. For 3 days, they move silently around the flanks, mapping bunkers and listening to conversations. Then they call in artillery. They stay long enough to confirm the damage, then slip away before the surviving Viet Cong even know they were watched. A SEAL raid on a similar target would have looked completely different. Helicopters might insert a larger force near the objective. SEALs and supporting troops would move in fast, destroy the camp, seize documents, and fight their way back to extraction. One approach was about precision intelligence and long-term pressure. The other was about direct destruction and shock. Neither approach was superior. Both were essential to the war, but they were not interchangeable. An SAS patrol thrown into a fast-moving SEAL-style raid would have lacked the tools and training for explosive entry and close-quarters combat. A SEAL team thrown into a week-long SAS-style deep reconnaissance mission would have struggled with endurance, noise discipline, and long-term stealth. It would be like asking a sprinter to run a marathon, or a marathon runner to explode off the line in a 100-meter dash. Two forms of athleticism, two forms of warfare. Consider their radio usage. SEAL teams communicated often with support elements, boats, helicopters, nearby units. Their radios helped coordinate extraction and fire support in real time. SAS troops used radios sparingly to avoid detection. Messages were short, often coded, sometimes sent only at specific hours. The jungle's thick canopy distorted signals, so they carried long antenna wires they unrolled carefully, aiming for the clearest transmission possible. One unit talked often, the other only when absolutely necessary. The missions shaped even their sense of time. A SEAL felt the weight of minutes. An SAS soldier felt the weight of days. A SEAL thought, "We must be in and out before they react." An SAS soldier thought, "We must stay unseen for as long as needed." Two completely different clocks, two completely different ways of thinking. This is why Navy SEALs couldn't operate like the Australian SAS in Vietnam. Not because they weren't elite, not because they lacked skill, but because their missions, rooted in doctrine, environment, command expectations, and operational goals, shaped them into different tools for different tasks. The SEALs were the scalpel that struck quickly. The SAS were the eyes that watched silently. Two kinds of strength, two kinds of courage, two ways of shaping the battlefield. The war moved on, but the lesson stayed. For the Australian SAS, Vietnam wasn't just another conflict. It was a proving ground, a test of small-team warfare pushed to its limits. And for the Americans who watched them work, especially the Navy SEALs, it became a case study in what was possible when doctrine, environment, and identity matched perfectly. By 1971, the SAS had refined their craft into something close to an art. Their patrols could vanish into terrain that swallowed whole battalions. They could watch an entire regiment move beneath them without ever being seen. They could strike, melt away, and leave enemy commanders confused about where the threat had come from. But as the war wound down, people began asking a bigger question. Why didn't every elite unit do it this way? Why didn't the Navy SEALs operate like the SAS? The answer was simple. They couldn't. And it wasn't about skill. It was about identity. The SAS were built from the ground up for deep reconnaissance. That was their DNA. They were hunters who preferred silence over noise, patience over aggression, and information over body counts. Their victories were measured in what they learned and in how many enemy operations they quietly disrupted. They didn't chase firefights, they prevented them. They didn't rush objectives, they observed them. Their entire system, from training to doctrine to leadership, was designed for this kind of work. The Navy SEALs were built differently. Their mission set was wider. They specialized in coastal raids, demolitions, direct action, and amphibious insertion. Their operations required speed, violence, and precision. They hit targets, blew up infrastructure, captured prisoners, or supported conventional units. They didn't spend 5 days in the jungle watching a supply trail. That wasn't their job. Their commanders didn't need that from them, and the war didn't ask that from them. When SEALs operated inland, they performed aggressively and effectively, but their mission profiles were never designed to mirror the SAS. Imagine trying to take a world-class sprinter and turn him into a marathon runner halfway through a race. Both are athletes, both are elite, but each is shaped for a different fight. Still, there was respect between the units. SEAL officers in Vietnam often spoke highly of how the SAS approached reconnaissance. Some tried adopting elements, smaller teams, tighter noise discipline, slower movement, but they quickly discovered that copying another unit's playbook didn't mean copying its identity. You can borrow the tools but not the culture. And in war, culture matters. The SAS spent endless hours mastering the smallest details. Every patrol rehearsed hand signals until they could communicate entire tactical ideas with a single motion. Soldiers practiced taking one silent step at a time, rolling their feet across the ground to avoid snapping twigs. They learned how to breathe differently in dense jungle so their chests wouldn't brush against vines. In the SAS, these weren't tricks. They were habits, drilled until they became instinct. SEALs, meanwhile, mastered skills the SAS did not need: night swimming under rough surf, underwater demolitions, boarding vessels in darkness, rapid strikes on coastal targets, operating in and out of boats while carrying full combat load. They were ocean hunters. They owned the rivers, the estuaries, and the coastlines. Their missions demanded explosive entry, fast action, and violent execution. They operated in places where stealth meant something different. By late 1971, both units had carved their own reputations into the war. SAS patrols were known to the Viet Cong as ghosts. SEALs were known as the men with green faces, feared for their sudden raids. Two elite forces, two different battlegrounds, two different objectives. In the final months of Australian involvement, HQ in Nui Dat reviewed SAS after-action reports. They all said the same thing. Small teams, long-range reconnaissance, and patient tracking worked. It was reliable, repeatable, deadly, but only in the hands of soldiers trained to accept boredom, silence, and discipline as their daily companions. For many warriors, that kind of slow, deliberate craft was harder than combat. In contrast, American reports celebrated SEAL successes through shock action: ambushes on riverbanks, raids on village strongholds, lightning strikes on supply depots. Their commanders didn't ask for a unit that could spend 6 days unseen in a bamboo thicket. They already had the MACVSOG recon teams for deep penetration. They had long-range patrol units. They had different chess pieces for different parts of the board. So the comparison between SEALs and SAS was never fair. They were elite, but elite in different ways. When Australian forces eventually left Vietnam, the SAS returned home carrying a reputation built on quiet excellence. Their methods influenced future generations of reconnaissance units, including some American special operations groups who studied Vietnam-era patrol techniques years later. The idea of small, flexible, autonomous teams would become a cornerstone of modern special operations doctrine. But even then, SEALs and SAS continued to operate differently, each committed to their specialized roles. The lessons that endured weren't about which unit was better. That wasn't the point. The point was that war rewards those who understand themselves. The SAS understood they were hunters of information. SEALs understood they were raiders and maritime warriors. Each played their part, but Vietnam proved something important. Stealth, true stealth, is a mindset, not just a skill. Patience is a weapon. Silence is a tactic. Terrain is an ally. And a team that can disappear in plain sight holds a kind of power that few armies ever master. When you strip away the myths, the legends, and the exaggerated stories, you are left with a simple truth. The SAS succeeded in Vietnam not because they were superhuman, not because they knew some hidden secret, not because the Americans lacked ability. They succeeded because they knew exactly what they were, and they never tried to be anything else. That may be the most important lesson of all.